forgot a meeting,
Yeah, that's a good idea.
I'd like to call to order the East Ascension Drainage Meeting to order for May 7th, 2018. I'd like to let it be known that Mr. Cloat, Mr. Lambert, Mr. Johnson, and Mr. Turner. Mr. Lambert, they expecting a new grandbaby, and everyone else is at work. So we have enough here. Would you please stand for the invocation followed by the pledge? Please bow your head. Dear Lord, please give us the strength, the wisdom to conduct our drainage issues and watch over our parish. We ask these things in Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Anyone wishing to speak on any agenda item, please sign in with Ms. Deborah. Like to accept the minutes of the April 9th meeting.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Moved by
Second.
Mr. Chairman, second by Mr. John. Under the chairman's report or announcements, Mr. President, you have anything?
The only thing, and I don't know if it's on the agenda, I was going to give you all a report on that that litter in ditches with the sheriff's office. We did a pilot program, and they picked up 15.7 miles, which was from the East Baton Rouge line to the City of Gonzales line on 61. Now, you know, you got a media there, and then you got two big ditches, so that's a little more than normal. And they picked up 778 bags of trash, 78 average a day, and that's 1.7 miles a day. They did it for 10 days. It took 2 weeks to do this, and so give us a little barometer of where we at. So he has been out of town, and we're arranging a meeting to put something together. Then I could give you something concrete. Now this crew was totally furnished by him, and I'm looking at trying to maybe put one of our guys with the truck with the trail and stuff like that. We're going to try to work together to get the most bang for our buck. But the crew right now that we have cutting grass runs us like $92,000 a year. Well, it was 80-something. It went up 5%. So we're looking at something on those lines, and we can variable bounce them around a little bit. But I'm gonna come to y'all with the whole deal. See the biggest crew we can get out of it, you know. So that's where we are with that.
Mr. Bill.
Hey, Mr. President, thank you. Do you know how many was in the crew for the sheriff? Was it 10?
I know 2 deputies, so
Okay.
I don't think it was 10. It wasn't that big, but it was
Okay.
maybe say 6 or so
Okay.
prisoners, and you had to have a porta can.
Yeah.
You know, and so you had to have a little trailer with that. Then they used our trailer to pick it up, and then we brought it to our roll-off instead of going all the way back to the. So we're going to try to work out some things together, to make it more economical. And I'm going to see how many prisoners we can get out of it to maybe try to do 2 crews if possible.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
It's definitely showing up in the parish. It's really looking good.
But in the sheriff's right, it's not all people just throwing stuff out the window. If you go down the L-line right now, you're going to see 5-gallon buckets and big pieces of cardboard that's flying out of the back of trucks. And supposedly his deputies have zero tolerance. If you got something in the back of your truck flying out, they're going to give you a citation.
Yeah.
Good.
Me too. Mr. Aaron.
Oh, no.
You good? You good? All right. With that, we'll move on to number 6, the drainage report. Mr. Turo.
We have several projects ongoing, consultants that are working on our projects. One is the Bluff Swamp and Spanish Lake flood risk reduction improvement. GSA is overseeing that work. The geotechnical investigation has been done. The jurisdictional determination or the wetland permit has been done, and the GEC is being tasked to do the H&H study by the parish, and they require some cross-sectioning done to be done, and GSA is coordinating that also. So that's one ongoing task. We do have we're working on a floodplain management plan, and that will be explained in number 7 on the agenda. So we'll have more details on that. We actually have a presentation by HNTB. They also have submitted a LOMAR for the Bayou Conway Panama Canal drainage area, and that was submitted to FEMA. FEMA came back wanting some extra work done. That too is an agenda item. It'll be number 8, so the details on that will be explained further. The New River Drainage Canal is another improvement project that's going to be ongoing that we want to, I guess, to go to the next level. A study was done by H. Davis Cole, and the decision, I think, was made to, there were several alternates that was performed with that study. The alternate that the city and I guess the consensus of what the alternative that chosen was just to take out that weir, and that too is going to be an agenda item that'll be explained further. But that's that has you know, everything to do with that New River project. Which includes the city, and the city concurs with that choice also. That'll be brought out. The other agreement that was if it was brought up before the last meeting, which was to pay for the to the Corps for them to have assistance, for us to pay for assistance, for them to expedite our 10/404 permits. That is going to be submitted to the Corps. We just, it was submitted once and they wanted some better documentation, so that's going to be submitted shortly to get that process going. So that's it as far as the.
Is that's what you have, Mr. Tour, on your drainage report?
Yes.
We'll start with Mr. Dawson with any comments, questions for Mr. Tour?
Well, thank you, Joey. I see you have, maybe I missed that, you said it, but you have the Pelican Point subdivision as a sub-item under this. Is that, or is somebody going to talk about that?
What is that? Which one?
I was going to take it up.
Oh, I'm
right after
sorry.
this.
You're going to
Yeah.
take that up
Yeah.
separately? Okay, so it's,
Yeah.
I see it looked like it was under the drainage report. No, I
It
don't.
is. Ron's going to talk about that shortly.
Oh, okay. So I don't have any questions on the other part. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Dan?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Joey. I believe you said both 7 and 10 are going to be taken up specifically when we get to them with HNTB and the weir. So that's where my questions are probably going to lie. So I think, Mr. Chairman, it's best to hold water to them, right?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Aaron?
No, I have no questions right now.
Ms. Terry, you have anything for the report?
I do have concerns about the 404 project. I think in a meeting with Kimberly with GSA, it was brought to my attention. I need some clarification, and I think she's probably best able to provide it, that the permit that we will be requesting from the Corps will not fall under this 404 dollars. Am I right, Kimberly? If you want to elaborate on that for the benefit of the other members of the committee, and that causes me some pause about whether this is a program into which we ought to enter at all. I don't know how many other Corps permits we're going to be hoping to accomplish, but if this one isn't going to be able to utilize it, I would like for someone to advise me which one would, and if it's justified.
Mr. President?
Councilwoman, I had heard the same things you heard, so I called the colonel up, and he said, as soon as I sign a contract, everything we get him is going under there. They're not going to wait to hire somebody like that other guy told him. And so we're waiting for him to approve the contract. I'm going to New Orleans the day he calls, sign the contract, and we can, everything we give him after that is falling in there. It's no waiting for us not being in that category.
Well, that would be a great relief to me because I was getting ready to start campaigning to pull out of this mess.
I agree. Thank you.
Kimberly, was that your understanding from the meeting that you had?
My conversation was with John Herman, and he wasn't working on this specific agreement. He just advised that it usually takes a while to set him up, and he wouldn't wait on the person to be hired. But if that's not the case,
Colonel, I told him he wanted to know who told that. I gave him the man's name, and he said he would be dealing with it. But he assured me that they would, as soon as we sign the contract, everyone we send is going under that.
Well, that is a tremendous relief. I found that so discouraging, and I thank you, Mr. President, for reaching out to them, and I appreciate Kimberly's efforts in bringing this to our attention, and we certainly want to get that under that program, or we don't need it. Thank you.
All right.
Mr. Johnny?
Not at this time.
With that, we'll move on to A, discussion for Pelican Point subdivision cross drains. Mr. Ron?
Yes, earlier in the week, we had the opportunity to take William out and actually go observe it. And a lot of things that are concerning there. It's not something that we just want to make a decision on. We need to review that further internal. And we'll be looking into that.
Go ahead, Mr. Bill.
So, Ron, just make sure I understand that. So we're going to come back later with a proposed solution that, you know, you guys have begun the evaluation, and we'll have some recommendation over the next maybe few months. Is that fair?
You're correct in that, Councilman. I think we need more time rather than one meeting. I would defer this until we can really investigate it and come up with a sound decision of where we need to go with that.
That's good. We want the right decision.
And, you know, just to clear up, I mean, it's a road and drainage issue. So, it's all gonna have to work together on this. Roads. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, mainly it's the drainage is causing the roads to cave in.
Exactly.
The problems with the drainage causing the road, so.
All right, we'll look forward to that.
Thank you, Ron.
All right, we'll move on to number 7, general business, presentation by HNTB. Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I'm Melissa Kennedy from HNTB. We're hired to work on the floodplain management plan, and as part of that task, we were requested to look at the ordinances and see if we could come up with a quick fix to some of the ordinance concerns. So I'm going to talk about that. It wasn't as quick as we had thought it was going to be, but here we are. First, I'd like to acknowledge a couple other people, Jerome Fournier of Planning and his staff, thanking him, William Daniel and his staff, thanking them, CSRS folks and Owen and White folks, and then some select Drainage Board members who helped throughout this whole process because it was a kind of a daunting, long process. So let me just go through the agenda. Basically what we did is we looked at all the various documents related to drainage and did a review of those. We also took into the consideration the parish's concern on fill for developments and individuals. And then we came up with a summary of general findings and then overall recommendations for various ordinances. So the documents review consisted of reviewing not only ordinances, but all the documents that are out there in the parish on your website that are related to drainage. Multiple land development codes, uniform development codes, and then there's subdivision regulations, construction specifications, policy documents, etc. So on this slide, I'm highlighting 3 of them in red. Those are the ones that we decided were the most important and covered everything that really needed to be covered, and the others were sort of ancillary to those. In general, we came up with 3 kind of items that cover all of these documents. Policies, which are your guidelines for what it needs to be implemented or is out there now and we're updating. Procedures, which are how to implement the policies for the reviewers and for developers and individuals. And then there is enforcement, making sure your policy and all your design requirements, et cetera, are being followed. And I'm going to tell you, we are not covering enforcement in this preliminary review and recommendations. So overall, our summary of findings based on reviewing everything and looking at all the documents and documentation were that there are too many documents that kind of cover various drainage aspects. There's inconsistency between documents and lack of cross-referencing from the documents. There's also outdated design criteria and gaps in some of the design criteria. There's lack of clear guidance for submittal requirements, which makes it difficult not only for developers but also for reviewers. And then there were multiple documents that were applicable to the same topics. So we're trying to address all those. And then there is a disconnect between some of the policy requirements and the review procedures. And then lastly, there is no tie to the current existing master and land use plan. Now, I know there's currently in effect or under contract another firm to look at that, and they are coordinating with us on the drainage aspect to include the drainage requirements in that land use plan. So overall, we decided on recommended changing 3 documents. One, we decided to use the LDC Appendix 5 drainage as the benchmark, the main document to be followed. Under that, then we also have this drainage impact study document. There were 2 out there. There's one called Drainage Impact Study Requirements and then a Drainage Impact Study Policy. And they were kind of covering some of the same things. And then we were told, well, no one used the one document, so we took the other document, which is called the Drainage Impact Study Policy, and combined some of the requirements from both and made some clarifications and recommending utilizing that as your main guidance. And then the last one is updating the UDC Flood Damage Prevention Code, Chapter 9.5, limited changes in that one. So specifically, I'm going to start with the flood damage prevention, UDC Chapter 9.5, because it's probably the simplest one. The concern on that one is it did not address or talk about any of the fill requirements, and the guidance on the elevations for a certificate wasn't as clear and consistent with some of the other documents. So we are concerned that that would cause, or that does cause, not everyone following the same criteria for the elevation and potentially inconsistent construction from what is supposed to be designed. And the inconsistent application of design criteria. So we basically did a few things on that one. We updated the state statute because the reference to that was incorrect and outdated. We added a cross-reference for fill to the LDC Appendix 5 drainage ordinance so that those two now are connected and correlate to make sure everyone's on the same page. We also added a definition for development and for a floodplain administrator because those were not currently included in this document. And then we updated the specific standards for the elevation certificate, specifically to be 1 foot above the BFE, which is in there, but also to add the needs to be 1 foot above sanitary manholes if applicable. So that's consistent then with some of the other documents and consistent with what they were actually requiring. Next is the LDC Appendix 5. The concern here is that there's not clear requirements specifically related to development of individual lots and between subdivisions, major, minor, and commercial developments. And there is concern that outdated design criteria and gaps in the design. So we wanted to address those. The impacts of that is then you're potentially getting more fill than what you're really wanting to be permitted, and your potential for downstream flow increase and loss of storage. If you lose your storage, you're increasing the amount of water going off-site and increasing your flow downstream. So we do not want that. And then potential upstream impacts through loss of conveyance. If you're losing your conveyance downstream, you're going to cause the water to rise upstream. So we're trying to avoid all of those things. So specifically what we're recommending for individual lots, regardless half acre, greater than half acre, it doesn't matter. We're limiting the fill to 3 feet no matter what, and that's just under the structures. There's already requirements in there regarding how far out under the structure you can go. But we're limiting it to 3 feet for all individual lots, but they don't have to necessarily mitigate for that. It's just under the structure. However, for subdivisions and commercial development, and again, we looked at this a lot and we're trying to make it consistent and with what we thought the intent of the ordinance was in the first place. So subdivisions, major, minor, and commercial, we're limiting the fill to also 3 feet, but they have to mitigate for that fill. So any fill in the floodplain has to be mitigated for. And we go into more specific requirements regarding that. The other thing is that, and we also on the commercial and subdivisions, we're maintaining that 10-foot perimeter from the edge of the property. That was not in there before, so we wanted to make sure that was in there because we understand there's been concerns regarding that. Then we also made the elevation of the structure consistent with the UDC, the 1 foot above BFE as well as 1 foot above the sanitary manhole. We added some definitions. We clarified the definition for backwater and added definitions for compensating storage and detention. And then the other thing we did on this one is we changed, or I shouldn't say changed, but we added a criteria for detention for the 25-year, 24-hour storm event. It doesn't take away from the 10-year. They still have to meet the 10-year requirements as well in terms of discharge, but they have to size it to meet the 25-year. And the reason we did that is because it is a widely accepted standard practice currently. It does lower your flood risk. It's been adopted by other parishes and LADOTD, and it was something this drainage board actually had recommended a couple years ago. So the last document is this drainage impact study policy. This is a document that goes into a lot more detail on the requirements related to commercial development and major and minor subdivisions and what they need to do. So we expanded on this one a lot. In addition to the other concerns regarding gaps in criteria and fill concerns, this one also we wanted to clarify the permitting submittal requirements because currently they weren't very clear. So again, the intent here is to make consistent design and construction. So what we did specifically on this one is We added specific requirements for your map submittals. We added a lot of map submittals. We have a pre-development map submittal requirements, post-development map submittal requirements, watershed map, and a ferment map requirement. So we expanded on the map submittal requirements to make it very clear on what's pre and what's post so that you can evaluate your prior and after conditions to make sure you're showing no adverse impact. We also updated the hydrologic and hydraulic design requirements. Again, no adverse impact for the 10-year and 25-year, 24-hour design criteria. And we added a 100-year check for the max water surface and peak discharge rates. We also updated the rainfall criteria. We did that in the LDC Appendix 5 also because the rainfall criteria was outdated, so we just updated that requirement. And then we said we need to provide the upstream and downstream water surface elevations from storage designs for the 10, 25, and 100-year 24-hour storm. And your storage facility can't overtop at the 100-year design, 24-hour inch storm. And we said no increase in upstream or downstream water surface elevation unless you can prove that there's no adverse impact or adverse effect on any property. We also updated the watershed and flow and conveyance requirements. So for the watershed flow, we said we need to mitigate flow changes without increasing flooding upstream or downstream. For conveyance, we added a bunch of model requirements and added an extension of the model upstream and downstream so that you're covering beyond just your site to make sure you're not having an impact upstream and downstream. And then for the detention requirements, again, we added specifics regarding the sizing, the discharge conditions, and again, the no adverse impact requirement. And then last, for the fill compensation, we added a number of requirements. How to calculate the volume. Basically, all fill below the base flood elevation needs to be compensated for. You can't count dead storage, which is basically any storage below normal pool. You can't count that in your compensating storage. You have to have free draining discharge, and it has to be separate from a stream. You can't connect your detention to an actual water body or to a stream. And you can't count the volume that you're already utilizing to attenuate runoff as part of your site development. So your detention has to take into account both of those, the fill mitigation as well as your storm water design. So this just kind of is a graphical representation of how fill within a floodplain can affect your flood elevation and flood extents. Now, I'm going to caveat this saying that this example does not take into account any compensating storage or such. But if you notice, if you see floodplain before filling, it's a limited area. Those homes and the business to the left are not included in the floodplain. And you see once you start adding a lot of fill, that floodplain goes not only higher, but it extends out further. So we're trying to, with all of these requirements and changes and edits and clarifications, trying to get it so it's more consistent, so you're going to have consistency in your designs and construction. So that was just an example to show what can happen if you're not addressing fill appropriately. This next slide, this is the Bayou Conway Panama Canal drainage basin, and what it's showing is the various elevations, ground elevations, and it's showing the BFEs in the yellow cross lines. So what we're trying to show here is that there are some locations that are probably just not going to ever be conducive for filling, or you're not going to meet your fill requirements, or maybe you just shouldn't build. For example, in the blue area where you're less than 5 feet, let's say you have 3 feet is your ground elevation, you have a 7 feet BFE, you can only fill 3 feet. In order to get higher, you have to do a different kind of construction, pier and beam, chain wall, whatever. But the other concern is it's going to be very difficult to compensate for that because your ground is already so low. You start digging deeper to get your water in there. Now you have to build berms to pump water in to achieve your storage. So there's just concerns regarding the ability to actually meet your requirements in some locations. And then the last slide, this is just an example of what I was talking about where you only have to compensate for fill within the 100-year floodplain. And again, you can't count what is called normal pool or dead storage. So on the right is where you're filling, on the left is where you're trying to show compensating storage, and that crosshatch area is area that is below the normal pool, which you can't count in your compensating storage. So that's pretty much it. I tried to go through quick, hopefully not too quick. Questions?
Mr. Bill?
Thank you, Melissa. So can we get a hard copy of this? I wish I'd have had it ahead of time. I didn't follow the whole. Did you say are we gonna get something here? You're gonna email something to us, or we're gonna?
Jerome, I can definitely give you the presentation. I think we were waiting for agreement on how moving forward before providing the actual revisions. I have all the actual revisions, but I'm gonna let Jerome.
So tell me, how'd you come up with the 3 feet max fill?
Well, again, we felt the intention of the original ordinance was trying to be 3 feet, and then we did an evaluation in a one drainage basin study area to evaluate putting in fill and seeing what impact that has on the floodplain. And we looked at trying to utilize the rate of development that's currently going on in that floodplain. However, we used Bayou Conway Panama Canal, which wasn't the best one to use, we realized, because it has such a huge storage area. It's going to take a long time to get to the point where that one's going to have an impact. But we then looked at, okay, well, instead of just looking at the rate of development, let's look at just filling in a percentage of the floodplain and what impact that has. And so just based on that, we felt that 3 feet was a good limitation.
So I guess at some point, are we going to see a map of Ascension Parish that says, using 3 feet as the max fill, these are the properties that would be affected, or what are we? How are we going to judge that parish-wide? And then look at 2 feet. Did you guys look at 2 feet or 4? How did you?
We didn't. I don't think we looked at 2 feet specific because at the time it was focused on 3 feet because that was we felt was the intention.
So I guess the question is, are we going to have something parish-wide to look at this and see the effect?
What we're intending to do is to, in the next phase, is evaluate each drainage basin and come up with the floodways for different events, 10, 25, 50, 100, so that you can see where those are in each drainage basin, and then we'll make a recommendation by drainage basin.
How about drain? Okay.
Because, some you're not going to have that much impact. You could probably build closer to water course. Some other ones, it's going to have a much greater impact, and you're going to want to avoid.
So maybe I didn't hear. I guess the 1 foot above BFE, that's going to be the slab. Is that the slab height?
That's the first floor.
The first floor height, the first floor.
Mm-hmm.
So what about? Did you look at most recent? Most recent elevation or most recent flood. So let's say, let me just say, was it August 2016? Did we look?
We did look. Well, we heard that, and parish members felt that that was too restrictive of a criteria. We had record inundation in there, and I know the board took out record inundation because of the 2016 flood. So we suggested putting record inundation back in minus the 2016 flood. But the concern was that because it varies throughout the parish, it was going to be too hard to try and evaluate that on a case-by-case basis. So they just said, let's just take out the record inundation completely. So it's not in there now, and it's still not in there.
Yeah, well, I mean, I know we did that right after the flood,
Right.
just in respect for the people that were trying to rebuild. But, we're a few years past that now.
Well,
Anyway,
And that flood in some basins, that's not the record flood in some basins.
yeah. So, I mean, you could just say record flood. I'm not saying you say August
You could,
2016.
but then I think you're going to be putting a hardship, like you said, on some people who do live in an area where they did have that record flood.
Okay. So, and I guess I'm going to switch over to the drainage impact study, and you talk about 25-year event. That's going to be the rainfall event that the model will be based on. Is that correct?
It requires and 25-year to do the analysis for the modeling. And then you have to do a check with the 100-year to make sure you're not causing adverse impact.
100-year rain event?
100-year, 24-hour, yes.
Yeah. So at what point we look at the 100-year flood event versus, the 100-year across the whole basin? Do we ever look at the effect?
That, and again, that's going to come more into play when we evaluate each drainage basin and determine the floodways for the various events. That'll take that more into consideration. Because you're right, the 100-year, whatever, 24-hour rain event is not the same as a 100-year flooding event.
Right.
Correct.
So what I guess I would be interested in is what effect would these developments in the floodplain have on the 100-year flood event in that basin? So is that something that will be evaluated or not?
And I think, and that's when we evaluated the fill in the floodplain, we did look at that. We looked at the impact on the 100-year flood event. And that's why we came back and said, okay, well, it's not as big of an impact in the Bayou Conway Basin because it's such a huge, has such a huge drainage storage area, but it may have a bigger effect on some of the others. So again, we're going to try and establish those floodways, and we can evaluate that in the each of the watersheds. We haven't gotten that far.
Okay.
That's next.
And so I have one last question about pier and beam. Did you guys look at incentives for pier and beam type development?
We do not include incentives at this point in time.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Dan.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Wow. Like Bill, I'd like to have seen this earlier, too. This is very detailed, very comprehensive, and I don't want to use the word vague. It's not vague. It's just probably beyond my understanding right now. Having it earlier, like my colleague said, would have been a big help. I'm sure that's not your fault, but what I find is this DIS, like our TIS, drainage impact, traffic impact study, codes, ordinances, and you mentioned the ULDC, the LDC, what have you, actual in-house policy statements, et cetera, is just what I thought, and I think a lot of people thought and still believe is a disaster in this parish. I mean, I've captured, probably shouldn't have took so many notes, or I might have been able to keep up with you better. Your study found too many documents that were inconsistent, outdated design criteria, heard the word gaps, multiple documents on like topics. Which one do you follow? Disconnect between policy requirements and review proceedings. And one that really stuck out in my mind, no tie to our master plan, which of course everyone knows is outdated, and we're now in the throes of spending close to $500,000 to get a new master land use plan. So my first question goes toward that fifth criticism you have of our existing drainage policies. How are you going to tie the new master plan, which is not complete yet, it's in progress, with all of these different things that you are, and I'm going to use the word because that's going to be my second question, eventually recommending, because I didn't hear a recommendation tonight as much as I heard about all the problems and where you think you're headed in the next phases and so forth. So is HNTB communicating with the master plan company that's doing our
Yes.
land use plan?
Yes, we've had one meeting, it was a very preliminary meeting, just to go over what they're doing, what we're doing, and how we're going to be coordinating as time goes on. And we've already provided them, I know we've provided them some information on current flood levels. So the intent, as I said, when we get into each of the drainage basins and develop those floodways for the different flood events, they're going to use that information to make decisions on land use planning.
And the reason I asked that, I think my colleague, Councilman Dawson, asked an excellent question about maps and alternative types of building and how far. I mean, I'm not sure we need to necessarily get in incentives, but I think we at least need to be saying, in these particular areas, if you went as far at one point, I really piqued my ears up and said, well, maybe you shouldn't be building there. I wouldn't mind seeing maps throughout the parish where it would encourage, and that's what a master plan should do, development where, as in the old one says, there's inadequate infrastructure, discourage where it's inadequate versus encourage where there is adequate. Or if you insist upon building in a low-lying area in order to not flood your neighbor and do all the things necessary, you may be forced to put your house up on,
Absolutely.
you said chain wall, something I understand, because I just had my house in Slidell put up with a chain wall at a foot plus BFE. So hopefully that's being communicated. My second question is, of course, in there was also what Bill said, please send us an electronic copy of this and anything else y'all do. When, I assume it will, HNTB make actual recommendations of specific language edits to our Unified Land Development Code and our Drainage Impact Study
We
policy?
have it. All the things I talked about in the specific
We
recommendations.
just don't have it tonight.
Yes, you do not have it tonight, but we have actual documents showing red line crossouts, additions in text, et
I
cetera.
mean, you covered just a plethora of things. So I
Yes.
imagine there's all kinds of, you talk about all the different documents. You talked about section 9.5, which I'm a little familiar with as a planning commissioner, appendix 5, even the master plan itself being appendix 3, et cetera. So you're going to specifically tell this council, we, HNTB, recommend you delete this.
Yes,
You add this.
Yes.
You do this, you do that.
Yes.
That's all the bang we can get for the buck.
yes. And that is on those three documents that I talked about.
Right.
Those three then will need to be further evaluate the others so that the others, I would recommend the others, then the references just cross-reference to those
Right.
three and take out anything else in there.
That's done right now, though.
The three are. The three are, not references to the others or referencing
Okay.
back from the others to those.
Because I tried to take this topic up in strategic and was told by the administration that it would be covered under the money we pay in you guys
Yes.
to stand down. So we've all been patiently waited, and I sure hope at the end we don't get just this was wonderful, a PowerPoint presentation that shows all the nastiness we had. What we need is a fix.
Yes.
And I anxiously await Ms. Kennedy that fix. Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Aaron?
First of all, thank you. I'd love to see the red line documents. We can get those sent to us. Yeah, a lot of great things have already been said. I just want to get an understanding that one of the little diagrams you showed, that when a floodplain gets fill built into it, does that mean that you're expanding the width of that floodplain eventually?
You could.
Okay.
You
and-
can, by filling in and definitely if you're not compensating for that, then yes, because that water needs to go somewhere else.
And would that lead to houses or businesses that have been built supposedly outside the floodplain at a safe level, then having the possibility of those being inundated with floodwaters?
It could, yes.
So what I'm seeing is that we've continued to build in floodplains using fill, and every time we do this, we are risking other areas that think that they're outside of the floodplain,
If you're not compensating for it.
or
And so-
not compensating enough.
Or not compensating enough. And that's why we looked at evaluation of, okay, if we keep the fill to this amount at this at this development rate over time, what impact does that have?
And so what you're saying is that we're, in the areas that are developing more quickly, they're at higher risk of doing irreversible damage.
Yes.
Okay, and you know, that, I want to reiterate, and possibly we'll bring it up at another meeting, possibly looking at stopping the use of fill. Or let me ask you this, would you recommend stopping the use of fill until we know where it's safe to use it and not safe to use it?
I don't think I'd recommend stop using it at this point, because what we've also done is, we've changed some of the design criteria, we've clarified it, we've updated it so that you're going to get improvement in your designs and theoretically in construction just with those changes and allowing the fill. Now remember, we said 3 feet max. Currently, development can go much higher and is going much higher.
Well, and I guess that's my point. If we were to say, hey, let's limit it to 3 feet for right now, because we don't have any of these changes on the books, right?
Correct.
So right now, we can build a subdivision 8 feet, and there's nothing to stop it. And that could have a detrimental effect on other areas around us.
Theoretically, you have requirements in here, it's just that they're not as good as they could be. So when these new ones or updated ones are adopted, it will be better. It would be better, even with higher fill. But like I said, we're not recommending higher. Because you're right, eventually you're going to get to the point where, and I was trying to show that you won't even be able to compensate for your storage anymore because of your elevations and your existing ground.
What is the timetable that we look at from just your work that has to be done until we can put this into effect, knowing that from the council perspective, that could take an extra 45 to 90 days?
That, I don't know if I can answer that. Jerome, you want to? I mean, we've got, like I said, the edits prepared.
The edits are prepared, and we have the documents with scratch-throughs and add-ins. And if it's the wish of the committee, we can have a study session like we did for the transportation policy. We'd be happy to schedule that the next few weeks if at all possible. That's certainly something we'd be happy to do.
I think that'd be good, because right now I'm scared that we're doing irreversible damage to some areas. Mm-hmm. That we're not going to, unlike traffic, it's oddly enough easier to build a road. It's a lot harder once you put the fill in to compensate for floodwaters that are spread elsewhere onto somebody's house that was already there. You can't, we have somebody in the crowd that can tell you that you can go lift up that house, but it's very expensive to do that. And the parish don't want to pay that money. Should we not be continuing to build in floodplains with fill right now until we know where we can do it?
I don't know if I would say that, because I could have, I don't want to say that just because that's more of a political decision. If you're following the criteria correctly and limiting, how much you're doing, managing it, then it should be okay. If you're not managing it and it's just continuing, then yes, you're going to have a problem. And I didn't talk about, but one of the other issues, and are you going to kill me if I talk about this?
I'll protect you.
Right now, there's no requirement for a permit for an individual homeowner, individual property owner to fill. So they can just fill. Even though your ordinance is restricted currently, there's no mechanism for them getting a permit or you guys enforcing that. So that's a problem. So.
You reckon?
Individual.
So we'll let Jerome add more to that.
I want to talk a little bit further about that, because that is very true. We don't have a policy necessarily or enforcement side of it. But when a property owner comes in with an elevation certificate, we can basically tell through that elevation certificate whether they've got over 3 feet of fill on that property. And right now, we're making that property owner comply with the ordinance. If they're over 3 feet, we'll look at the site, and we'll go in and tell them that they need to compensate. They'll need to dig a pond, do whatever they need to do in order to compensate for that. We also require them to meet with the lot requirements, because right now they have to have a 3-to-1 slope from the top of the field to the grade, the natural grade, and they also have to have a certain distance between the bottom of the slope and the property line. So we are making them comply with that portion of the ordinance. But again, we don't see that typically until they call in for a building permit. And when a building permit is issued is when the first time we basically step on the site and look at the property. So, you know, if we adopt the 3 feet as an example, as you know, as being suggested tonight, we will adopt a method of trying to police this as best we can. All right.
Okay. And one last question, I promise. And with the 2016 flooding, would any of this help remedy the backflow problems that we had, or was that just an
No.
anomaly of nature?
That's a nature
Okay.
situation.
I think that's important for people to understand that that event was unique.
Right. I mean, you know, if you're proceeding with your levee designs and.
Yeah, but that's
a
not
different, right, no, it does not
exactly.
impact this, no.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Ms. Terry?
Well, all of you know I'm not an engineer, so I will have to have a lot of training in this area, and I look forward to that. Thank you.
Mr. Johnson?
Thank you so much, Melissa. We appreciate the presentation. Very well done, but I have a lot of questions as well, and I'd like to see that edited version.
Okay.
And one thing that gave me a little bit concerned, you said at the beginning of your presentation, you're covering the review and recommendations, but not enforcement. I think that's something that, you know, whether you handle it or we work with Jerome on that, I think this council would embody better enforcement of our ordinances, especially in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yep, yep.
Mr. Dan?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not looking for a round 2, but something that Jerome said piqued my interest. You were offering this commission, the council, a study session for drainage impact study within the next few weeks, like we did for TIS. Jerome, I think that's an excellent idea. I know many of my colleagues participated in the traffic one, and it was wonderful. But please, sir, if you do that, or I don't know, Mr. Chairman, do we need to direct him to do it? You give us a few weeks to examine the specific Unified Land Development Code edits, the strike-throughs you mentioned, Ms. Kennedy, the new language, whatever you have that we haven't seen. But by all means, let's do this. And as Councilman Lawler was saying, let's do it ASAP. Well, I'm not, after all this time, rushing to just, but man, let's do this before we have another August 2016. And not that this is even just going to prevent that. We are where we are right now. I understand that. But what bothers me the most, Aaron kind of danced around it as well, is that we would just continue to go on until we actually get to a point of no return, some of which maybe where we have overly developed places, particularly in my district, it may well be that. I hate to say that because there's too many people in my district voting with their feet right now. But we need to do this post haste, Mr. Chairman.
I'd be happy to schedule that as you direct me, and I know the administration would be in support of that as well.
Mr. President?
We talked about it in the staff meeting, and we talked with Jerome before, that at this time, we have no enforcement. It's got to go hand in hand. So if we start working with y'all on when y'all looking at approving and what you're going to approve, we're going to work together to have enforcement ready, because without that, you have nothing else, nothing either.
Very good. And look, throughout this whole process, we are the property value. We are trying our best. We want everyone to be comfortable with this. We don't want to hurt anyone. The pier and beams, there's just going to be some places in this parish that you're going to have it, and we'll line that out. It's just the value of a person's property I want to take care of, and it's just with going through all of the next phase of this in each basin. A lot of this is going to come out, and it's going to help us all make good decisions. You're working with two other departments, Jerome and everyone. You're trying to get all this information in. You're doing a good job. So
Thank you.
really appreciate everything and look forward. I know Jerome will set the dates for this, and we'll move on to the next phase.
All right,
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, with that, we'll move on to number 8, approval of supplement number 1. Mr. Joe.
This is a supplement to a task that the Drainage District gave to HNTB. They submitted a LOMAR letter of map revision for the Bayou Conway and Panama Canal areas. FEMA came back and wanted a little more detail, and they spelled out all the details that HNTB would need to submit. HNTB priced it, and this is asking for a supplement of $10,700 to get that task done.
So
Bill.
moved, Mr. Chairman.
So Joey, is this description correct? It says for levy certification. I mean, am I misunderstood? I thought this was to establish the BFEs in those Zone A's.
Yeah, Melissa will have, she knows the history of that.
Did I miss that?
I can answer that. This contract or this task order was under the master contract for levy certification, so that's why the description says
But that's
that.
not what we're talking about
No.
doing. We're talking
No.
about changing the A zones to AE zones. Is that correct?
Correct, and we had 2 rounds of comments with FEMA, and I thought the last go-around, we were all good. And then they came back and said, well, we want these other bridges and culverts included in your model specifically. So we didn't have the information on those, so we have to get survey and then add those to the model and then update the maps.
So do we know how many homes, how many residences are affected by this?
I do not know that answer.
Hundreds, I know there are hundreds.
Most of it is in the Boyle Bayou area
Pelican Point.
and some along Bayou Conway.
There should be in Pelican Point also.
That part's already been done. What we did when we updated the model, we had a survey, new cross-sections, new bridges, et cetera, that we felt were important to include. Remember, we took FEMA's original model, which is very limited, and added a lot of information, a lot of data. And they came back this third time and said, oh, well, we want you to add these other bridges and culverts in the model as well.
So did that affect the?
I don't think it's good. If anything, according to my hydraulic engineer, it would maybe be an improvement.
So what the classification of the zones or the LOMAR for the Pelican Point, is that waiting on this also?
Yes,
So that's
yes.
even though they didn't have any comments on that, this is attached to the same LOMAR.
Correct.
Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Sadler.
Yeah, and Ms. Kennedy, just to be sure, a follow-up from Bill's comments. So this is survey work on what I see as 8 culverts listed in our packets.
Mm-hmm.
And that you would then take that and rerun an analysis, because you already got one that doesn't have those in it, because FEMA now wants that. And you're going to update the maps, et cetera, and as the actual deliverable, you're going to supply a revised LOMAR
Correct.
to FEMA, and then we just sit tight and wait till they ask us to do something else.
Well,
Maybe. Or maybe they're happy this time and
I really hope they're happy this time. I thought they were happy last time, but you never know. But I do believe this is it. This is it.
thank you.
Motion to approve, Mr. Chairman.
Moved by Mr. Johnny,
Second.
second by Mr. Bill. Any opposition to the motion? Not, motion passed. Right, number 9, approval. Mr. Joey, what you got on?
This is just to continue with the progress towards dredging of New River Canal and, going with the recommendation of taking out the weir and proceeding with the project.
Motion, Mr. Chairman.
Moved by Mr. Johnny,
Second.
second by Mr. Bill. Any discussion? Any opposition? Not, motion passed. All right, number 10, authorization. Mr. Joy.
This is to amend the existing contract with H. Davis Cole in the amount of $585,486. The increase is that amount, and is to execute that part, to do all the study, the plans, put all the plans together, get all the permits, and they have everything itemized on the complete package of getting that work done.
Mr. Terry?
What I see here is an increase of $150,000.
No.
No, that's the current.
That's just the current fund.
Contract
Okay.
that we have now with them is $150,000,
Well, I apologize.
Increases
So-
435.
and it's increasing by $585 for this
Okay.
task.
So my question is,
Depends whether you go to
Was this
485
in-
or 700 number.
would this, I don't remember the numbers around the original decision we made, that the best solution to this problem was to remove that weir. Would these numbers have made a difference had we known them? That we have a,
Task 1 and 2 was to study and it helped us make the decision that we were going to take out the weir as opposed to taking the weir out and rebuilding it. So with this decision, based off of Task 1 and 2, we're simply going to take the weir out and not replace it. Then we're going to proceed with dredging. So this
Okay.
takes all of that into account, taking out the weir, the design of taking out the weir and of dredging the entire area, which is,
2 locations.
yeah, it has everything to do with it, the entire length of 2.7 miles.
okay, thank you very much.
With that
Right.
being, we
That
need a
includes
motion.
geotech and environmental
Another
and any other
question.
permit that's needed.
The original contract did not have the environmental and permitting.
Okay.
It's really the same contract with those.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
I researched and asked some questions of Joey and William. The initial contract for $150,000, they've only spent $70,000 of it, so that was a not to exceed. And this other new figure is the same thing. It's a not to exceed. It's basically painting the worst case scenario, and that means that if they do an analysis of the sediment and it can't be recycled, which is what we're hoping for. We'd love to get 100% recyclable material. That may not be the case. If they have to haul 100% of what they anticipate to have to dredge off-site, that's going to be very expensive. If they can recycle it, even like 90% of it, it would cut the cost of the project in half. Is that correct, Joey?
Yes.
About. So this is trying to look at the worst case scenario, but to make sure we cover our bases. That's a not to exceed amount.
Mr. Dan.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I'm still confused about the history of this and how it all happened, because I was sort of under the impression, and I probably got it wrong, that maybe the city of Gonzales is participating at least in a little of the financial sting of removing this weir, or how exactly, I don't know who this question goes to, perhaps our IDD or Mr. Turo himself or the parish president, whatever. How do we get to where we are again? Maybe a little historical explanation there.
I was told this was discussed, probably several meetings ago, just the fact that the city of Gonzales does pay towards the drainage district. And I'm reading notes really from Jackie Bowman that she supplied to me, in that the city pays towards the drainage district between 3.5 and 3.7 million per year. And this project is 1.2 miles. The anticipated cost is about 2.6 million. So, you know, the thought at the time was that, you know, they're already contributing towards the drainage district, and the amount that they contribute in a year, you know, exceeds what the project would cost within the city limits.
Okay. So this $750,000 to just remove, the number you just gave, this is $750,000 to remove this weir, total, no? My colleague's saying no, shake his head. It is 2.7, or what was the number you just gave, sir?
For what?
Well, for the project, for everything, it's everything.
Oh, the whole thing is about 6 million, yes. That's the construction, and everything having to do with it would be 6 million. That includes the portion that's within the city and outside, which is.
And we were comfortable as a drainage commission that we would be willing to spend this amount of money? I realize it's a change order because it's more, so.
Right, and this would be spread out through about.
When something happened historically with the city and we found out what they contribute to the drainage commission yearly and so forth, seems to me things have changed now. I mean, I've got some people that are contacting me every day about this issue, telling me that this just seems awful expensive. We could just get some heavy equipment and just do this ourselves, but I'm positive it's not that simple. Okay,
right.
Everybody, you know, y'all can continue to write me. God bless you, and I want that. I love you, but man, this is a lot of money, and I'm not quite sure how much of the responsibility really is for this parish.
Well, it's
to bear versus.
I know it is a big price, but it is a worst case scenario. You know, the hopes is that you know, the soil that's going to be taken out. In fact, Davis, the consultant, and I talked about probably, you know, trying to make it a zero dirt type section at a time. You know, this was not something you would task all at one time. This is going to be spread out through probably 4 or 5 different tasks, and I think that's the way Davis Cole broke it down, was 4 or 5 different projects and different tasks, so that the monetary impact wouldn't be so great, and it would be separated through 5 to 7 years to get the entire project done. And step one is to simply take the weir out and see what happens then, and see, you know, if that alone makes a big impact. And to look at.
Whoa. I thought we understood that if we taking this weir out, it's going to make things better. If we're going to sit here tonight and say, well, let's kind of see how that works, and now you spent all this money and quote unquote it doesn't work good or well. That's not good English, not.
That's on the draft.
Might chime in a minute, Councilman. The request to amend the contract is for engineering to study the whole project to find out what would happen if we did take the weir out, and what is the condition of the channel within this limits currently today, and then what do they propose to do in the drainage part of it. So that's what the contract would give us, is the profile of the whole project as it is today. And if this improvement is made, this is the depths and the amount of spoil that would come out. And then from that, we would then gain the opportunity to go further upstream. In other words, the Bayou Goudin kind of drains into New River, which right now it stays elevated at the height of the weir.
Right.
So if you lower this, potentially you could do another phase project following this, going up into the Goudin towards Highway 73, Southwood Village, all the way to St. John Church. That whole area could be the next phase of this, long term. So that's one portion of it. Then the upper branch of New River from the extent of this boundary could be looked at. We're currently shredding the upper branches of New River from 73 to Highway 30. But then this could potentially lower that whole area a couple of feet to, I don't know the exact amount. That's what this study would show us. But then you can phase a project on the upper branches of New River and look at doing a future improvement there. in areas that have been under the control of this weir for the past couple decades. I don't know the exact time frame. It's been there a while. But that's where this study would show what would be the benefits of it. And then from there, we would come back with the recommendation, do we proceed forward? We wanted to come to you guys first before we spend the money on the study to make sure that you guys support it.
Well, I mean, you've gotten more of my attention and I guess support now because you mentioned Southwood Village and 873. We all know where that is.
If I may,
I know all the people that live out there are listening to this tonight and so forth. That's it, Mr. Chairman. I think Mr. Bill's good.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Dan, I appreciate you bringing that up because you, just right along here, we're looking at about 5-6 districts that this is going to
affect.
And you've got some parts, 2, 3, up to 4 feet that's being restricted and held up. The whole key is to get this water to the pump station, which, that's another phase. But this right here will let us know how much it's going to get out, how much, where we're going to be at certain points. And this is a good thing. Mr. Aaron.
I was just going to move that we authorize to amend this so we can
Second.
move on.
Moved by Mr. Aaron, second by Mr. Johnny. One other discussion, Mr. Bill.
Sorry. I just want to make sure I understand it, Joey. And so you would take the weir out, and without the weir in there, that's going to determine whether how much dredging you'll have to do after the weir is removed, because that increased velocity may do some dredging for you. Is that correct, or?
Yeah, it could. It scour and make some improvements alone.
And so what I'm also trying to understand is the 585,000, I guess altogether 735,000. At the end of that, we're gonna have a complete design, and you guys are gonna come back to us and say, this is what we recommend as far as actionable steps. And so we get a bite of that apple at that time. Is that
Yes.
correct? Okay, thank you.
Mr. President.
As you said, Mr. Chairman, when we do those big canals and we get the water to the pumps quicker, the water goes down faster. But we were under the direction of you all, gave us the task to remove the weir. And as Mr. Cagliari said, out of that 150, 70-something was spent so far. And so that was, okay, we're going to remove it. Now we got to do the rest of the engineering to the next phase if you want to do it.
Mr. Chairman, the intent of the project is to improve drainage. And it's not just Gonzales, it's not just District 10. As he said, there's going to be 5, maybe even 6 of our parish districts that are going to be affected, and drainage will be improved. And just as an example, in the 2016 flood, which was an anomaly, old Gonzales had houses on pillars that flooded who never, ever flooded. And, the consensus of the experts tell me that if the weir hadn't been there, that might not have happened. So we're trying to correct an old standing problem that's been with the parish forever.
All right, we have a motion and a second. We finished discussion.
Ready.
Any opposition? Not, motion passed.
Thank you.
All right, authorization to renew cooperative endeavor agreement. Mr. Ron.
Yes, this is just a renewal for the existing CEA with the Ascension Parish Sheriff's Office for inmate labor to not exceed amount of $91,678.
Motion.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Dan, second by Mr. Johnny. Any discussion? No opposition? Motion passed. Number 12, authorization to enter into a contract with CSSI.
Motion. Second.
No motion, second. Any opposition? Discussion? None. Motion passed. 13, authorization to accept quote. Mr. Ron.
This is authorization to accept quote to enter into a contract with Timken Gear and Services Incorporated and East Ascension Consolidated Gravity Drainage District Number 1 in an amount not to exceed $438,218 for emergency gearbox repair for Marvinboro Pump Station, pump number 3, and authorize parish president to enter into and sign any documents needed to execute the contract.
Moved by Mr. Johnny,
Second.
second by Ms. Terry. Discussion? Any opposition? Motion passed. Number 14, Mr. Aaron.
Motion
adjourn.
to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second by Mr. Johnny. We adjourn.
Wilson.